guest. We are joined with the man himself, Jeremy Kuzmarov. Jeremy Kuzmarov is managing editor for Covert Action Magazine and author of several books on U.S. foreign policy. Jeremy, it's been a while, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing great. Good to be with you.
No, man, it's good to have you. There are a lot of stories that apparently broke last night. And I guess the big one is coming out of the New York Times saying that Iran is racing or looking for a different way to create a nuclear bomb. Effectively, Iran is looking for some kind of new means, some faster means to expedite the process of creating a nuclear weapon. This is talk that was taking place at the end of the Biden administration, where there was a lot of push to try to get Joe Biden to have some kind of nuclear attack, or I'm sorry, some kind of bombing run on Iran itself and on their, let's say, nuclear elements. Now, Iran for the longest time has said we're not trying to have a nuclear bomb, but the reality is events on the ground have changed. And so I don't know if this is trying to create a context by which Trump can justify an attack on Iran. I mean, for God's sake, Netanyahu is coming into the United States. He's not going to be prosecuted. He's not going to be arrested, unfortunately. But from my understanding, part of the conversation that is supposed to take place here is him trying to convince Trump to get rid of the deal with Gaza. And of course, his continuous attempt of trying to get the United States to effectively attack Iran on behalf of Israel. And so when I see a report like this coming out of the New York Times, my first thought is, okay, is this real or is this contrived in order to create a context for an attack, kind of like the weapons of mass destruction stuff? Um, Whether it's real or not, I got to be honest, I don't really care. Iran is a sovereign country. Iran can do whatever it wants. This notion that we can have some kind of bombing run because we don't necessarily like them developing nuclear weapons, it's nonsense. Israel has nuclear weapons. And, with the fall of Syria, with this kind of marginalization of Iran in that region, you could imagine that they may be looking for a way to balance the equation. And in the same way that North Korea has been able to prevent the Gaddafi of North Korea, a nuclear bomb is looked at that way of maintaining a certain level of security for your own state. Hence, the reason why they don't want Iran to get a bomb. It's hard to bomb this place if indeed they have the capability of ending everything all at once. Give me your take on this. Do you believe the story coming out of the New York Times that Iran is looking for some kind of faster, magical means to create a nuclear weapon?
Well, yeah, I think your analysis is right on the mark, is excellent on both levels. Yeah, on one hand, we should be a bit skeptical about this story given the track record. I mean, there's a book I read by Gareth Porter that was probably written about 8 or 9 years ago now, that showed that there was a lot of hot air for years, propaganda about the Iran nuclear program and exaggeration to give a pretext for this long held goal of regime change and trying to overthrow the Islamist government, which had reclaimed Iranian sovereignty after the years of rule of the Shah, who had been imposed by the United States and was heavily supported by Israel. It was basically a puppet regime. The neoconservatives have wanted to punish Iran ever since they reclaimed their own country. On the other hand, I agree with your assessment as well that it would be perfectly rational and legitimate for Iran to develop a nuclear bomb and really a means of their own survival. If you look at what happened with Gaddafi in Libya, Gaddafi, in hindsight, made the mistake. He was, I believe, developing a nuclear weapon program, and then he made this bargain with the
Mhm.
West and Condoleezza Rice, and he backed off on Libya nuclear program and made accommodation with the West, and then they double crossed him and overthrew him a few years later, and Libya is in chaos now, and is a failed state. And look at North Korea; the bomb has enabled their survival. I mean, they've been subjected to a 75-year regime change operation by the United States, which bombed their country back to the Stone Age during the Korean War, and they developed the nuclear weapon as a protection mechanism. So it would make perfect sense for Iran, especially with what's gone on in the last several years. I mean, Israel has ramped up its regional aggression, has gone into Lebanon, has attacked Iranian targets, as clearly ramping up for that regime change operation. And we know Netanyahu is a super war hawk, an unhinged criminal who would have been trying and wanting to go into Iran for years, and he would do it. And now he has Trump by his side, and these extreme Israeli, pro-Israeli hawks, messianic with this messianic worldview that supports a greater Israel. So Iran, feels very vulnerable and threatened. So this would make perfect sense for their point of view. So I think you're right on the mark on two levels in your assessment.
Yeah, I mean, it's not insane that, under normal circumstances, countries try to find ways to mitigate an advantage that another country has at their disposal. Iran, for the longest time, has said, we are not trying to get a nuclear weapon. We don't see the point. We don't need one. We have other means in order to create a deterrence and a balance. Fast forward, the Syrian government goes belly up. Russia's role in Syria is marginalized, and we don't even know if Russia is going to remain in Syria, considering what has taken place. Israel has taken much greater territory in Syria and is openly opined about attacking Iran directly, effectively saying, okay, well, Syrian air defense is no longer an issue. And because it's no longer an issue, we now can attack Iran directly. Iran had been talking about doing True Promise 3 for months and never did. In fact, ended up backing away from it almost entirely at this point. So, an event that was supposed to create this level of deterrence didn't create anything because they effectively backed away from it. And so, I can totally see this point of view of we need to be able to defend ourselves against the US and Israel in what they consider to be a combined threat from both. And if you're thinking of that as Israel has a nuke, we need a nuke in order to ensure the integrity of the state. I can see them getting to that, but I guess the thing is, when the Iranian scientists, I believe this was last year, towards the end of last year, the Iranian scientists pointed out that we have the technical capabilities of making a nuclear bomb if we want to make a nuclear bomb. Meaning, this is no longer a technical hurdle. This is not something that we don't have the capability of doing. We just choose not to do it. That's why I'm skeptical of the story. Like, what do they mean? Come up with a faster way of building a nuke? Like, what does that even mean? Like, they're acting as if there are 20 different ways to build a nuke, and we are looking for this new, faster pathway. Okay, if Iran already has capabilities of building a nuke, maybe what they're referring to as breakout, the speed at which they can go from wherever they are to having a nuclear device that they can attach to a missile. But even that, it sounds weird. The framing of it, the language sounds very strange to me. We're looking for a faster way to build a nuclear weapon. That just sounds bizarre. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know where to go with that. It could go. It could be either. But we do know that Netanyahu is going to use this as a casus belli. Trump is going to use this as a casus belli. Kellogg is already talking about applying quote unquote maximum pressure against Iran with the story coming out. There was questions and pushing the Joe Biden administration, and for that matter, the incoming Trump administration, to attack Iran. Where do you think this goes? I mean, and I guess there are two questions with this. One, do you think there are negotiations taking place behind the scenes between the Trump administration and Iran? I mean, after all, it took Nixon to go to China. So is that what we're looking at behind the scenes? And two, do you think Netanyahu will be successful in trying to get Trump to run some kind of attack on Iran?
Those are good questions. It's hard for me to predict. I do know we have, two extremist leaders who've had their sights on Iran for a long, long time.
Yeah.
They're ideologically driven. Netanyahu has shown a propensity for extreme violence and aggression. Uh, um, he's also on shaky ground domestically and within Israel, and I think that's adding to the possibility of reckless behavior on his part. to try and salvage his power at a time he's facing ultimately potential indictment and imprisonment. And that's a dangerous, situation when you have a leader who's known to be reckless and aggressive, who's facing the threat of imprisonment. He can do anything, and war, the formula for trying to sustain his power and divert the attention of his population from the domestic inequality and misrule that he's fostered. So, and then the Trump administration has stocked its cabinet with these super Israeli hawks with the messianic. What's scary, you have people like Mike Huckabee who don't think rationally. They have this biblical vision, like elements in the
Exakt.
Israeli government who
Yeah.
have this view of a greater Israel and think that God instructed them to spread the power of Israel and kill its enemies. And they're really not rational people or thinkers. So I think it's a very dangerous situation. I don't know if ultimately certain cooler heads will prevail simply because of it would portend a disaster. I think Iran would be an even more disastrous invasion than Iraq because the Iranian population will fight for their country's sovereignty. They fought to overthrow the Shah. They're not going to go back to a neo-colonial era. Whatever the flaws of the Islamist government, the population will rally behind their nation and its sovereignty. I mean, that government has, for all its flaws, upheld the sovereignty of their country, and has certain legitimacy in the eyes of its people. I think any military strategist will recognize the peril of trying to carry out this regime change operation. And I mean, what are they going to replace the Iranian government with? I mean, there had been talk with the Shah bringing back members of the family of the Shah, but that's not going to sit with with the Iranian population. They endured a quarter century of horror under the Shah, who sold out their country's assets and instituted these torture chambers that are now museums. So, I mean, what the plan? We've seen in all these countries, the U.S. or West goes in, and they don't really have a great plan. Like Libya post Gaddafi. I mean, what was their plan? They were trying to bring in these pro-Western neoliberals who really had no huge following among the local population, and whose economic program was detrimental to the local population and entailed the selling off of treasured assets like oil. And that's just been a formula for chaos and catastrophe. I mean, potentially, maybe the same thing could happen in Iran, but I don't know. It just so my point is that I mean there are elements in the military I think who would caution against this, or even intelligence agency because they would see the peril of this invasion and what's the plan if somehow you succeed, which is in this case I think unlikely that they could actually overthrow that government. What is your plan after? And I mean, they're going to say, look, this is going to cost a huge amount of money and entail direct manpower. And is there a stomach among our public? I mean, the Israeli public is rather fanatical, unfortunately, in its hatred of the Palestinian people. But do they have a stomach for endless war? I mean, that war, the wars in Israel have taken a toll on the local population. It's diverted their spending from needed social programs. It's made their country much less secure. Life is very precarious and difficult. Did the Israeli population have a stomach for a long campaign in Iran in addition to all these other wars? I mean, they didn't really achieve their goals in Gaza or Lebanon. And these are just endless quagmires, and a lot of Israelis are killed. Uh, and what about the American public? I mean, the public here has grown tired of spending so much money on wars, even though it doesn't always directly affect us because they've been able to get away with, abolishing the draft and relying on proxy forces or drones or technology. But still, the American public is more and more leery of these foreign interventions and all the money. So that's a question if there's any kind of political will among the public. And that may constrain these fanatical leaders and imbalance. I believe these are mentally imbalanced people and sociopaths, and that's very dangerous. That we've gotten to a state where these kind of people are in charge of powerful militaries. That's not good.
They've come to the conclusion that might makes right, that they can effectively do whatever they. I mean, look at what Trump is doing now, right? I mean, he has effectively been shaking down the world. Been looking at Germany, looking at Mexico and Canada, saying get butt naked, and they may say, well, what do you mean we didn't get butt naked? You're telling us to get butt naked. Eventually, they got butt naked. Same thing with Colombia. Same thing with most likely it's going to be the European Union. When we pointed out where Joe Biden was on stage and he blew up Nord Stream, effectively saying we're going to blow up the pipeline if Russia goes in. And as I keep saying, the strongest position of Schultz, who was on that stage, who has a direct relation to that pipeline, considering the amount of the billions that Germany invested in it, and conversely, the fact that they need it. Energy is expensive in Europe. That pipeline was built because they needed the energy coming from that pipeline. And yet, the highest and the strongest position Schultz could take is, how high do you need my ass to be when you kick it? It wasn't like he was like, whoa, what do you mean you're going to blow up our pipeline? That's outrageous. That was not the position that Schultz took. Any more than Macron, or for that matter, in Mexico, Sheinbaum, all of these people effectively got around to capitulating. They made deals on something that they really shouldn't have made a deal on. Same thing is taking place with Greenland right now, where Greenland seems to be so freaked out by Donald Trump saying he's effectively going to take Greenland, or Denmark is so freaked out by it, that they've told, or the reporting is that they've told other European capitals, don't make a big deal about it. Don't overtly complain. This is something we're going to work behind the scenes. If we can just stay small in the corner, he may forget that we're standing here. He may leave us alone. Good luck with that. To piggyback on this, Trump has gone after South Africa now. He's threatened Europe, saying that Europe is going to be the next to get the tariff stick that he has been hitting all of these places with. And Ukraine. He is shaking down Ukraine for rare minerals. This is astonishing. Because, Donald Trump put a freeze on the resources that are going into the country. Now, there was conflicting reports over whether that freeze dealt with weapons. Apparently, it doesn't deal with weapons, but it's dealing with other money that's going into the country itself. Trump has come out and has effectively said, we want your rare minerals or else. Meaning, if you want to keep getting money from us, if you want to keep getting weapons from us, if you want us to keep backing you militarily, then you need to hand over these minerals that we want from your country. That's what needs to take place right now. And if we don't get those things, you might not get the protection, you may not get the weapons, you may not get the money, you may not get the things that we have been giving you all of the course over these last several years to keep your country solvent. That is astonishing. That is astonishing. Give me your take on this. Are we I've asked some of my guests, are we in a new norm? And what I mean by new norm, it feels like the world order after the Second World War, basically the orthodox of the world order that was crafted and came into being after the Second World War is fundamentally collapsing. It seems that they are chucking that to the dustbin of history. And they're looking at this as, we're going to get whatever we can get out of it. And if the countries can't do anything to stand in our way for it, bad day for them. Give me a take on this. Were you surprised when you heard the story come out that Trump was effectively blackmailing Ukraine for their mineral wealth? Give us minerals or you get no more protection from us?
Yeah, it's a bit surprising. Some of the behavior kind of came out of nowhere. Trump started talking about Canada should be the 51st state,
Right.
and just taking over Greenland. Although that he had discussed before when he was president. But I mean, I think it's just kind of exposing what the United States really is as a nation. It punctures the myths of American exceptionalism, or that America is somehow a benign nation. I mean, Trump just shows what it really is. That it's out to steal the minerals of other countries, even its allies, let alone countries, in the so-called third world. I mean, it's been doing
Mhm.
that for years and years. And Trump is just more kind of open, or he's taken it to a certain extreme that it shows it shows the true colors of what they are, the ugliness. Uh, and I think the only positive that can come out of this is that countries will start to get smart, like what you were saying with Schultz. These countries have just prostituted them to the United States for what? They got screwed. I mean, Germany got really screwed, as you were describing, with the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. America doesn't care about Germany. They're worried about a German-Russian alliance, and they wanted to, sell cheap American natural gas. So they did that criminal act of environmental terrorism. So yeah, countries. I mean, you're seeing a backlash. I mean, in Canada, Canadians are starting to rally around the flag a bit because these tariffs and the bullying of Trump that is off-putting the majority of the population. And look, Canada, under Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Canada was trying to assert more independence as far as its economy. I mean, Pierre
Uh-huh.
Elliott Trudeau is much more of a visionary compared to Justin Trudeau. He developed positive relation with China well before Nixon's opening. With Cuba, he didn't just go along with American dictates in the world. He had a smarter policy. He wanted Canada to be a peacemaker and reach out to those nations. His son, unfortunately, just sold out Canada to the United States, and Pierre Elliott was trying to, yeah, assert Canadian independence over its mineral wealth, and have certain nationalized industries, not just allow U.S. corporations to dominate the economy. But Justin Trudeau has kind of gone in a totally opposite direction, and he's not well liked at all among the Canadian public. And he's just gone along with these regime change operations and wars and this Russophobia. But now there's an opportunity. I mean, Canada sees with a Trump there's more momentum to stand up more to the United States. So there's an opportunity for leaders to come to the fore who reassert their country's sovereignty from the United States, and that'll be healthier for those countries, and maybe that'll bring some humility to the United States if they're going to face a backlash through these bullying tactics and isolate themselves more and more in the international arena. There'll be more of a backlash here, and the Trump phenomenon will fade, and we'll get better leaders, hopefully, in the future who would project a better image for the United States, and cultivate more positive alliances and not just shake down countries. Now, as far as Ukraine, I mean, I think, on this show, the two of us have been highly critical from the beginning of U.S. support for Ukraine. But this is kind of something else what he's doing. Although I mean, it showed that the U.S. just really, and Trump, they just want to get whatever they can, use Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine has been used, and I've had dialogue with some Ukrainians who live in my city, and
Mhm.
they were kind of oblivious and very naive about the United States, and they thought the
Really?
United States is going to save them. And they had certain legitimate grievances with the Russians, but the approach they took of taking on the Russian, a much more powerful nation, was pure folly, and this whole war has resulted in their destruction as a nation, and the death of a huge percentage of the country's youth. So this is just a great human tragedy. And now you have Trump shaking them down for minerals. It just adds insult to injury. So maybe Ukrainian will wake up that they've been used as pawns and it's sowed their own destruction. And their best course is to make a deal with the Russians and accommodate a bigger and more powerful neighbor and try and rebuild their country independent of the U.S. because the U.S. Design on Ukraine is also to have BlackRock take over their economy and have Wall Street. They're setting up this reconstruction agency. It was headed by Penny Pritzker, and she was just going to bring in the Wall Street vultures to take over further their economy, which they've already been doing.
Hmm.
So Ukrainian would be wise to mobilize against that, make a deal with the Russians, and try and rebuild their country independently.
Well, at this point, God, man, you're so right when you look at it in those terms. It's like not only did we leave them kind of down the garden path, so yeah, we pushed them into this kind of war. We said we're going to be with you for as long as it takes. And then you get this kind of pulling the rug from under them at the point where Joe Biden fails, Trump comes in. His main mantra is, I'm going to end the war. I'm going to end the war. He pulls resources out of the country itself and then turns around and says, oh, by the way, we need some of your rare earth minerals. Just saying. Because if you remember, Lindsey Graham was telling Donald Trump at one point that, we can't let the Russians get their hands on these minerals. We can't let the Chinese get their hands on these minerals. Ukraine has a huge amount of resources. And those resources can be the guarantor of the loans that we're providing Ukraine. And so, Trump is the same guy who went to Syria saying we're stealing the oil. We're stealing the oil. He's the same guy who said that the U.S. should have stolen oil when it left Iraq. And so now he's in a situation where he's in Ukraine, and his response is, we should take what they have at their disposal, rare earth minerals. You're going to give it to us, or else you are going to die on the vine. Like that. That is astonishing. That is beyond astonishing, especially when you put it in the context that we were effectively pushing them into a war. And on top of pushing them into a war, they lost that war. Just amazing to me.
Uh,
Do you think that there's going to be a turn of the worm on this, either in Europe, either in, meaning, do you think these European capitals, after this experience, after this example, whether they are effectively being shaken down all across the world by a US president, that this is going to somehow change how they deal with America, how they engage with America going forward, or
well,
not so much?
yeah. Well, firstly, I think a lot of those leaders have very limited credibility among their own population because of what they've done. How they've compromised their own country's sovereignty, and they've often allied with or allied with the United States to the extent that they've not governed in the interest of their own people. And the example of Germany you gave me on Ukraine is key to that. They poured so much money into Ukraine when it's in the interest of European countries to have good relations with Russia,
Yeah, of
to
course.
have access to Russian natural gas. And so Ukraine has been a disaster for those countries. And there's already been a revolt against those leaders. There have been a lot of protests in France and Germany.
Yeah.
So I think just this further exposes the weakness and pathetic nature of those leaders. And now they're being insulted by Trump. And I know they're in a hard position to stand up to him at this point. I mean, I think they will, for political survival reasons, they will maybe start to take a harder line against the United States. Uh, when that
Mm.
is clearly what most
We'll
of their
see.
population would want. But otherwise, I think we will see major shifts in European politics in upcoming elections, and a move, yeah, toward more sovereignty, and that's why this will ultimately backfire on the United States. They've kind of exposed themselves and gone too far with Trump, and it's going to start to ripple back on the United States and further lead to the decline of the American empire and move toward a multipolar world order, which I think is beneficial for humanity. We've seen now the true colors of the United States, and it's really an heir of the European colonial empires, which were out to exploit the natural resources of countries around the world.
Now we're
And
doing the same thing to
yeah,
Europe.
and it's out in
No,
the open. Yeah, and we're doing it to our own allies, and these are proud countries and strong countries that are not going to allow for that. So
Germany, jeez, Jeremy Kuzmarov. Thank you, my man. Jeremy Kuzmarov is managing editor for Covert Action Magazine and author of several books on U.S. foreign policy. Be safe, my man. Thank you for this.
thank you. Great discussion.
Absolutely.